You brought him in that rusty car. That is your budget date. Cute. Yeah, I replied. He is budget the same way a wrecking ball is just a metal ball. By the time their champagne glasses were empty, my budget date had frozen their assets and handed me 50% of the company they stole from my mother. They thought they were laughing at a cheap boyfriend. They were actually laughing at the attorney who came to repossess their empire. My name is Emery Patterson. To the people who sign the paychecks, I am the operations director. To the fresh-faced engineers who think they are going to change the world before they hit 25, I am the terrifying woman who rejects their expense reports. But in the grand, unspoken architectural philosophy of HelioCore Systems, I am the drywall. Drywall is the most essential, unappreciated material in any building. It holds the insulation in. It hides the ugly wiring and the rusted pipes. It creates the smooth, paintable surface that allows everyone else to pretend the structure is sound. But nobody walks into a penthouse suite and compliments the drywall. They admire the view. They admire the art. They admire the fixtures. If you notice the drywall, it means something has gone terribly wrong. It means there is a crack, a hole, or a stain. My entire career has been dedicated to ensuring that nobody ever notices me. Because if they do, it means the illusion of HelioCore's competence is shattering. It was 11:45 at night on a Tuesday. The office was silent except for the low hum of the server room cooling fans and the rhythmic swish of a vacuum cleaner down the hall. I was the only executive on the floor. I am always the only executive on the floor. I was currently staring at a spreadsheet that was bleeding red ink. Earlier that afternoon, a senior sales associate named Chad, who possesses a jawline sharper than his intellect, had promised our biggest defense client a delivery date of 6 weeks for the new guidance chip. The only problem was that the guidance chip did not exist. It was a theoretical concept on a whiteboard in a conference room Chad had never stepped foot inside. So there I was, surgically disassembling the budgets of 3 other departments, stealing resources from marketing, and reallocating 2 senior engineers from a vanity project just to make Chad's lie a physical reality. I was saving the company from a breach of contract lawsuit that would have cost us $4 million. Chad was probably at a bar right now, buying shots with the commission he had not arguably earned. The vacuum cleaner stopped. Elena, the night shift custodian, leaned on the doorframe. She held up a thermal mug. Black coffee, 2 sugars. Elena said. Her accent was thick, her smile tired but genuine. You are an angel. Elena, I said, rubbing my temples. I would die without you. You work too late. Ms. Emery, she scolded gently, placing the mug on a coaster so it would not ring the mahogany. The big boss. He left at 3, to play golf, networking. Elena, he calls it networking. She made a sound that sounded suspiciously like a scoff and went back to her cart. She knew. The cleaning crew always knows. They see what goes in the shredders. They see who leaves with whom. They know that while the C-suite is busy posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn, the people in the cheap seats are the ones keeping the lights on. The hierarchy at HelioCore is simple. At the top sits Graham Kincaid. Graham is a visionary, which is corporate speak for a man who has not had an original idea since 1992, but is excellent at shouting buzzwords at shareholders. He is loud, charismatic, and entirely hollow. He walks through the office like a feudal lord surveying his serfs, clapping engineers on the back and asking about projects he does not understand. Then there is his daughter, Sloan Kincaid. Sloan is 30 years old. Her official title is Chief Brand Architect. I have worked here for 7 years, and I still have no idea what a chief brand architect actually does, other than terrorize the social media interns and demand that we change the color of the lobby furniture to match the season's trending palette. Her office is a pristine glass box filled with white orchids and ring lights. Her primary key performance indicator seems to be the engagement metrics on her personal Instagram account, where she posts photos of herself grinding at the office, usually taken during the 20 minutes she actually spends here before leaving for a spa appointment. And then there is me, Emery Patterson, the boring, reliable, invisible operations director. My last name is a shield, Patterson. It is common, It is forgettable. It sounds like the name of a person who does your taxes or sells you life insurance. It allows me to fade into the background. It allows them to forget. Nobody at HelioCore remembers that this building did not always bear the name Kincaid. Decades ago, before the rebranding, before the IPO, before the sleek glass facade, this company was called HelioCore Lane Systems. It was a partnership. Graham Kincaid provided the handshake and the smile, but the systems, the core technology that allowed this company to dominate the aerospace sector for 30 years, that came from the Lane side of the letterhead. Specifically, it came from Lydia Lane. My mother was not a visionary. She was an engineer. She thought in vectors and propulsion ratios. She did not care about stock prices or gala dinners. She cared about making things fly higher, faster, and safer than anyone else thought possible. She was the engine. Graham was the paint job. But history is written by the people who survive the board meetings. In the late 1980s, Lydia Lane was erased. It was a classic corporate coup, quiet and brutal. She was painted as unstable, emotional, difficult. The narrative was that she had a breakdown and sold her shares to pursue a quiet life. The truth was far more complicated and far more painful. Graham Kincaid took her patents, took her company, and scrubbed her name from the lobby wall. He left her with nothing but a broken reputation and a pile of legal documents she was too heartbroken to fight. I grew up watching her fade. I watched the brilliance dim in her eyes as she watched Graham Kincaid on the news, accepting awards for technology she invented at our kitchen table. I learned a very important lesson from Lydia Lane. Brilliance is not enough. You need leverage. You need armor. You need to be willing to play the game better than the people who stole the board. So I became Emery Patterson. I got my degree. I worked my way up from the bottom. I did not storm into HelioCore demanding my birthright. I applied for a junior logistics role. I made coffee. I fixed spreadsheets. I became indispensable. I became the drywall. I learned every secret, every buried cost, every shortcut Graham and his daughter took. I waited. I took a sip of the coffee Elena had brought me. It was bitter, just the way I liked it. A distinct thwack sound broke my concentration. I looked down. The mail clerk had done the evening rounds and dropped a heavy, cream-colored envelope on my desk. This was odd. Inter-office mail was usually digital. Physical mail was reserved for termination notices or lawsuits. I picked it up. The paper was thick, textured, and expensive. It probably cost more than my hourly rate. My name was calligraphed on the front in gold ink. Ms. Emery Patterson. I slid a letter opener under the wax seal, an actual wax seal, because Graham loved to pretend he was British royalty and pulled out the card. The Board of Directors of HelioCore Systems cordially invites you to the annual Founders Summit Gala. I stared at it. The Founders Summit. This was not the company Christmas party where everyone got 2 drink tickets and a stale cookie. This was the inner sanctum. This was the black tie event for the board, the vice presidents, the major investors, and whatever entourage of influencers Sloan decided to drag along to make the event look trendy. Operations directors did not get invited to the Founders Summit. We were the ones who organized the catering and ensured the valet parking was insured. We were the help, not the guests. I turned the card over, looking for a sticky note attached that said, "For filing or check guest list against this." There was nothing. Just the heavy, mocking weight of the card. It had to be a clerical error. Sloane's assistant, a terrified girl named Jessica who looked like she hadn't slept in a week, probably clicked the wrong box in the database. Or maybe it was a pity invite. Maybe they needed a few more bodies to fill the back tables so the room looked full for the press photos. Date Saturday, November 14th, time 7 p.m., venue, the St. Regis. My thumb brushed over the raised lettering of the word Founders. A dark, cold amusement curled in my stomach. They had invited me to celebrate the Founders. They had invited the daughter of the woman they erased to toast the man who erased her. Graham and Sloan had no idea who I really was. To them, I was just Patterson, the woman who fixed the messes, the woman who stayed late, the woman who never complained. They thought I was safe. They thought I was grateful just to be in the building. I looked around the empty office. The glass walls of Graham's office on the top floor loomed above me, dark and silent. He was probably asleep in his mansion, dreaming of his own greatness. Sloan was probably at a club, spending the research and development budget on bottle service. I slipped the invitation into my bag. Usually, I would send an email to HR correcting the mistake. I would decline politely. I would stay home on a Saturday night, order takeout, and work on the quarterly projections. But not this time. The resentment that had been simmering in my veins for 7 years suddenly boiled over, hot and sharp. They wanted me there. Fine. I would go. I would put on a dress. I would smile. I would eat their rubber chicken and drink their overpriced champagne. But I was not going alone, and I was not going as Emery Patterson, the loyal employee. I stood up and packed my laptop. I turned off the desk lamp, casting my corner of the office into shadow. "Good night, Elena," I whispered to the empty hallway. Tonight was not just another night of fixing mistakes. Tonight was the beginning of the correction. They thought they were inviting a mid-level manager to fill a seat. They did not realize they had just invited the demolition crew. My apartment was the architectural opposite of HelioCore Systems. There was no glass, no chrome, and absolutely no pretension. It was a one-bedroom unit in a building that had settled into its foundations somewhere around 1975. It was clean, ruthlessly organized, and quiet. It was the only place in the world where I did not feel like I was holding up a collapsing ceiling. I walked in and dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. The smell of Thai basil and chili oil hung in the air. Elias Ward was sitting at our small dining table, surrounded by a chaotic spread of takeout cartons and legal briefs. To the untrained eye, Eli looked like a man who taught high school geography and enjoyed birdwatching on weekends. He wore cardigans. He drove a hybrid hatchback that was 3 different shades of silver due to aftermarket bumper replacements. He had a habit of pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose with his index finger when he was thinking. If you saw Eli on the street, you would assume he was soft. You would assume he was safe. You would be catastrophically wrong. Eli was a litigation and corporate governance specialist. He was the man companies called when the family trust had turned into a knife fight, or when a board of directors needed to be dissected without anesthesia. He did not argue in courtrooms for show. He dismantled legacies in quiet conference rooms using bylaws and forgotten clauses. He was a shark disguised as a golden retriever. "You look like you want to murder someone," Eli said without looking up from a highlighted deposition. "Please tell me it is Graham. I have a flowchart for that." "Worse," I said. I pulled the heavy cream envelope from my bag and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right on top of his pad thai. Eli picked it up. He ran a thumb over the gold leaf. He did not need to open it to know what it cost. He whistled low and long. "St. Regis," he noted, reading the address. "Founders Summit. That is a lot of syllables for a dinner party." "It is a mistake," I said, kicking off my heels and collapsing onto the sofa. "Or a joke. Sloan probably invited me so she can live stream herself firing me in high definition." I closed my eyes, letting the anger from the day drain out. She spent 3 hours today debating whether the font on the quarterly report was aggressive enough. Meanwhile, I am moving funds from the janitorial budget to cover the safety testing for the new thruster prototypes. Because Graham spent the testing budget on a golf tournament sponsorship, I am practically laundering money just to keep their rockets from blowing up on the launch pad. I heard the rustle of paper. Eli was not eating. He was reading the invitation again. "Emery," he said, his voice changing. The softness was gone. This was his work voice. "Look at the wording." I opened my eyes. "It is an invite. Eli. It says, 'Please come eat bad fish and clap for the narcissist.'" "No," he corrected. "It says Founders Summit. Plural. Founders." He stood up and walked to the small bookshelf in the corner. We kept a very specific leather portfolio there. It was battered, stained with coffee rings from the 1980s, and it smelled like old tobacco and drafting graphite. It was the only thing Lydia Lane had left me that mattered. Eli brought the portfolio to the table and unzipped it. He laid out the contents with the reverence of a priest handling holy relics. First, The pen. It was heavy, made of brass and steel, with Lane engraved on the barrel. It was the pen she used to sketch the initial designs for the Helio Drive. Second, the original shareholders' agreement. The paper was yellowing, fragile as dried leaves. Third, a side letter. It was handwritten. The ink faded to a dusty gray, signed by Graham Kincaid and Lydia Lane in 1989. I have been reading these again, Eli said, sitting down opposite me. He pushed the takeout containers aside. You always told me Lydia sold her stake, that she took a payout and walked away. That is what she told me. I said, that is what Graham told the press. She was sick. She was tired. She took the cash. She lied. Eli said. He tapped the side letter. Lydia did not sell. She knew Graham was going to gut the engineering culture to fund his lifestyle. She knew she could not stop him then because he had the board. So she buried her equity, buried it. I sat up. What does that mean? It is called a lane continuity instrument, Eli explained. He was in his element now, his eyes scanning the dense legal text he had practically memorized. It is a hybrid trust structure. Extremely rare. I have only seen it twice, and both times it was used by founders who wanted to protect their legacy from their own children. Basically, Lydia converted her 48% stake into non-voting, reversionary stock held in a dormant shell company. Speak English. Eli, I fix supply chains, not trusts. It means the stock sits there. Asleep, he said, using his hands to demonstrate. Graham gets to vote with it. Graham gets the dividends. Graham gets to pretend he owns it. But the instrument has conditions, covenants. He slid a finger down the brittle page. Condition 1. The company must maintain a minimum safety rating of AAA. We lost that 2 years ago. I whispered. We just bribed the auditors to look the other way. Condition 2. Eli continued. Research and development spending must never fall below 20% of gross revenue for 3 consecutive quarters. I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. 20%, Eli. Graham has cut RD to 6%. He funnels the rest into Sloan's branding campaigns and his own bonuses. We have been under 10% for 5 years. Eli looked at me. His expression was terrifyingly calm. And here is the kicker, the reversion clause. He turned the page. If these covenants are broken, he read, the voting rights and full ownership of the dormant shares revert immediately to the living heir in good standing. The trust dissolves. The shell company dissolves. The stock becomes active. The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. A siren wailed somewhere down the street. I own it, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I do not work for them. I own them. Technically, you have owned 48% of HelioCore Systems for the last 5 years, Eli corrected. You just did not file the paperwork to prove they breached the contract. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a fresh file. It was thick. It was new. So I did some digging, he said casually, as if he were talking about finding a new taco spot. I pulled the public filings. I compared them against the internal budgets you bring home to rant about. I have proof of the RD cuts. I have proof of the safety violations. I even found the shell companies Sloan uses to invoice the company for her consulting fees. It is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is fraud, and it triggers the continuity instrument immediately. I looked at the invitation again. The gold letters seemed to shine brighter. Founders Summit. They invited me, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. They actually invited me. They think they invited a mid-level manager. Eli said, they do not know they invited the repo man. He picked up the brass pen and twirled it between his fingers. Here is the plan. Eli said, if we file this with the state tomorrow, they will know. They will lock the doors. They will shred everything. Graham will be on a plane to the Caymans before lunch, so we wait. I said, we wait until Saturday. Eli agreed. We go to that gala. We let them eat their appetizers. We let Sloan give her speech about how she is the face of the future. We let Graham toast himself. He looked down at his clothes, the worn cardigan, the wrinkled shirt. They expect you to be invisible, he said, and they will look at me and see a budget date, a nobody, A teacher, a boring guy with a bad car and a cheap suit. You are going to play into it, I realized. I will be the most budget boyfriend they have ever seen. Eli promised. I will talk about coupons. I will complain about the price of gas. I will let them mock me. I will let Sloane make her jokes. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Constraints are good. Emery, you told me that. Constraints build pressure. We let them pressurize the room. And when the moment is right, when they feel safe, when they are drunk on their own arrogance, we pull the pin. I finished. We enact the reversion. He said, we take back the company in front of every investor, every journalist, and every board member they tried to impress. I looked at the heavy invitation, then at the man I was going to marry. He was not just a lawyer. He was a weapon Lydia Lane had left in a time capsule, waiting for the right war. Okay, I said, but you have to wear the gray suit, the one with the fraying cuff. Eli smiled, and it was the sharpest thing in the room. I was hoping you would say that. It really sells the narrative of financial struggle. He picked up his fork and finally took a bite of his cold pad thai. So, he said with his mouth full, tell me more about this seating chart. I want to know exactly how far away from the head table we are going to be when we fire them. The week leading up to the Founders Summit was an exercise in aggressive mediocrity. I had to become the dullest version of myself imaginable. I had to be so boring that looking at me was like staring at a beige wall in a dentist's waiting room. The office was buzzing with the frenetic energy that always precedes a corporate event. Graham Kincaid had called 3 emergency all-hands meetings to discuss HelioCore 3.0, a strategic initiative that seemed to consist entirely of buzzwords he had read in an airline magazine. I sat in the back row of the auditorium, nodding rhythmically as Graham paced the stage. He talked about synergy verticals and blue sky ideation. He used the phrase paradigm shift 4 times in 12 minutes, every time he paused for effect. I scribbled nonsense in my notebook. To anyone watching, I was the diligent operations director taking notes on the new vision. In reality, I was making a grocery list. But while my face was projecting loyal submission, my computer back at my desk was doing something far more subversive. I had set up a quiet, throttled data transfer, piece by piece, file by file. I was mirroring the entire internal drive to an encrypted server Eli had set up. I downloaded the vendor list that showed we were paying 3 times the market rate for raw aluminum from a supplier owned by Graham's brother-in-law. I downloaded the project codes for the Neptune Initiative, which was just a slush fund for Sloane's travel expenses. I downloaded the safety reports that the quality assurance team had flagged as critical failures, and which Graham had marked as resolved, without spending a dime to fix them. It was a slow, terrifying process. Every time it walked past my office, my heart hammered against my ribs. But nobody stopped. Nobody suspected the woman who organized the office birthday cards was currently stealing the company's dirty laundry. Then, on Wednesday, Sloane Kincaid arrived to boost morale. Sloane did not walk. She made an entrance. She swept through the double glass doors flanked by 2 assistants who looked like terrified woodland creatures. One of them was holding a ring light. The other was holding a stabilizer for her phone. Sloane was live streaming her walk to her office, narrating her life for an audience of teenagers who thought she was a self-made business guru. Hey guys, she chirped at her phone, ignoring the actual employees she was walking past. Just arriving at HQ. So much energy here today. We are building the future, literally. She stopped in the middle of the engineering bullpen. This was a room where 50 highly educated aerospace engineers were currently sweating through their shirts because the fuel pump on the new prototype was vibrating itself to death during simulations. The air smelled like stale coffee and panic. Sloane frowned at the chairs. They were ergonomic gray mesh, designed for people who sat for 12 hours a day. These chairs are a vibe killer, she announced, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. She turned to me. I had just walked out of my office to sign a purchase order. Emery. Yeah, these chairs, they are giving prison. Can we swap them out for something in a ecru leather, maybe something with a mid-century modern silhouette? I looked at the lead engineer. Marcus, who was currently holding his head in his hands as he stared at a failed stress test. Sloan, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Those chairs cost $800 each. They are certified for lumbar support. She rolled her eyes at her phone camera. Okay, well, aesthetics matter. Emery, a boring office creates boring products. Put it on the list for next quarter. We need to elevate the space. She swept away before I could respond. Marcus looked up at me. Did she just call the navigation system for a manned spacecraft a boring product, he asked. She was talking about the chairs. Marcus, I said softly, just keep the rocket from exploding. Later that afternoon, the morale boost continued with a mandatory town hall where Sloan unveiled the theme for the gala. She stood on stage, projected on a screen 20 feet high, looking surgically perfect. This Saturday isn't just a party, she told us. It is a celebration of our legacy. And I am so excited to announce that we will be revealing a massive expansion of the Kincaid brand. We are moving beyond aerospace. We are talking lifestyle, apparel, tech accessories. Because HelioCore isn't just about getting to space, it is about how you look while you are looking at the stars. The room went silent. The engineers looked at each other. We were a defense and aerospace contractor. We made thrusters. We made guidance chips. We did not make tech accessories. I knew exactly what this meant. It meant she was going to take the remaining R&D budget, the money that was supposed to fix the fuel pumps, and funnel it into a clothing line with her name on the label. Legacy brand expansions. I whispered to myself. It was theft. Plain and simple. Then came the email. It arrived at 4:30 on Thursday. The subject line was innocuous. Finalized seating chart. Founders Summit. Usually, these things were kept private, but Sloan's assistant had accidentally CC'd the entire all-staff distribution list instead of just the executive team. Within 3 seconds, you could hear the mouse clicks echoing across the floor as 200 people opened the attachment simultaneously. I opened mine. It was a color-coded map of the St. Regis Ballroom. Tables 1 through 5 were gold. That was the power zone. Graham, Sloan, the board of directors, the major investors, and a handful of celebrities Sloan had bribed to attend were all seated there. They were front and center, right by the stage. Tables 6 through 20 were silver, vice presidents, senior directors, and the high-performing sales teams. I scrolled down, and down, and down. I found my name at Table 39. Table 39 was not even in the main cluster. It was located in the back corner, wedged between the service entrance to the kitchen and the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was the table where they put the people they could not legally fire but did not want to look at. I was seated with the intern coordinator, a consultant who had been let go 2 weeks ago but had already received an invite, and the IT support guy who was on call for the event. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. It was Sloan saying, "You are the help. You sit by the kitchen door." I stared at the screen. A few heads popped up over the cubicle walls to look at me. They had seen it too. I stood up and walked to the break room to get water. I needed to move. Sarah, the HR manager who had been trying to get Graham to approve a sexual harassment seminar for 3 years without success, was in there making tea. She looked at me with sad, tired eyes. I saw the chart. "Emery," she said quietly. "It is bullshit." David, the quality assurance lead, walked in behind me. He looked angry. "You run operations for the whole damn building," he muttered. "You saved the orbital project last month when the supplier bailed. And they stick you by the toilets." "It is fine," I lied, forcing a shrug. "I like being near the kitchen. Hotter food." "It is not fine." Marcus, the senior engineer, joined us. He looked exhausted. "You have been here longer than Sloan has been alive." "Well, almost. It is disrespectful. I don't know why you stay. Emery, you could run any logistics firm in the city. You are underpaid and invisible." They were a Greek chorus of corporate misery. They liked me. They pitied me. They saw me as the tragic figure of the office, the competent woman who would never be queen. "I stay for the benefits," I said, keeping my tone light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Eli. He had sent an image. It was a screenshot of a draft document prepared for the state court. The header read, "Notice of Reversion of Controlling Interest, Lane Continuity Instrument." Underneath the image, he had typed, "Just saw the seating chart on the shared drive. Do not worry. When you own the building, every seat is the head of the table. Also, table 39 is great. It is closer to the exit for when we throw them out." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face all week. "What is so funny?" Sarah asked, stirring her tea. "Oh, just a text from my date," I said. "He is very excited about the food." I left the break room and headed back toward my office. I had to pass the executive conference room to get there. The door was slightly ajar. I heard Sloane's voice. She was laughing. It was that high, tinkling laugh she used when she wanted to sound charming. I slowed down. "Honestly, Daddy, stop worrying," Sloane was saying. "The seating is strategic. You put the investors up front so they feel special. You put the workers in the back so they fill the room but don't ruin the photos. I just don't want any friction." Graham's booming voice replied, "Patterson has been writing me about the budget for weeks. If she gets near the investors, she might say something boring about profit margins." Emery Sloane scoffed. The sound of my name in her mouth was like acid. "Please, she won't say a word. She is grateful just to be invited. Honestly, some people should be grateful we even let them clean up our PowerPoints. She is a glorified secretary with a spreadsheet fetish. Put her by the bathroom. She is used to dealing with crap." I froze. I stood there in the hallway, clutching my water bottle. Grateful to clean up our PowerPoints. Glorified secretary. For 7 years. I had told myself I was doing this for justice. I was doing this for Lydia Lane. I was doing this to restore the engineering integrity of the company my mother built. It was a noble, high-minded mission. But in that moment, the nobility evaporated. The heat that rose up my neck was not righteous indignation. It was pure, personal hatred. They did not just steal the company. They looked down on the people who kept it running. They looked down on the work itself. They thought competence was a service role existing only to support their vanity. I looked at the phone in my hand. I looked at the draft Eli had sent me. I walked back to my desk. I did not sit down. I stood over my computer and opened the folder containing the downloaded evidence. I renamed the folder. Originally, I had named it Lydia Evidence. I deleted that. I typed in a new name. The cleanup. If they wanted me to clean up, I would clean up. I would scrub them out of existence. I sat down at my desk and replied to Eli's text. "Make sure the suit looks extra cheap. I want them to laugh at us. I want them to laugh right up until the second I take the microphone." I stared at table 39 on the screen. It was the perfect place to start a revolution. Nobody ever looks at the corner by the kitchen, and by the time they turned their heads, it would be too late. The brakes on Eli's car squealed with a high-pitched, metallic protest as we rolled up to the entrance of the St. Regis. It was the kind of sound that made pedestrians stop and look, wondering if something mechanical was about to shear off and hit them. We were sitting in a line of vehicle royalty. Ahead of us was a matte black luxury SUV that cost more than a starter home. Behind us was a low-slung Italian sports car revving its engine with an impatient, throaty growl. And sandwiched in the middle was Eli's 10-year-old hybrid, covered in road dust, with a bumper that was held in place by what I strongly suspected was a strategic application of duct tape. The valet stepped forward. He was a young man in a crisp white uniform, and as he approached the driver's side window, his professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. He looked at the rust around the wheel well. He looked at the faded university parking sticker on the windshield. He looked at us. "Good evening," Eli said, rolling down the window. The motor inside the door groaned like a dying animal. "We are here for the Heliocore Gala." The valet blinked. He hesitated, holding the ticket out as if he were afraid the car might be contagious. "Of course, sir. Careful with the door handle. It sticks. It adds character." Eli replied cheerfully. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his cuffs. I climbed out of the passenger side, smoothing the fabric of the dress I had bought on clearance 3 years ago. It was a simple navy sheath, Elegant enough to pass inspection, but plain enough to be ignored. That was the uniform of my life. Elegant enough to be useful, plain enough to be invisible. We walked through the massive revolving doors, and the atmosphere changed instantly. The air outside had smelled of exhaust and city grit. Inside, the air smelled of lilies, expensive perfume, and old money. The lobby was a cavern of marble and gold leaf, illuminated by chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen rain. My stomach twisted. This was their world, Graham Kincaid's world, a world built on surfaces and shine, where everything was polished to a blinding gleam to hide the rot underneath. For a moment, the old instinct to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, washed over me. I felt like the operations director again, the woman who stood in the back of the room holding the clipboard while the important people drank champagne. Then I felt a hand on the small of my back. It was warm and steady. "Chin up, Ms. Patterson." Eli murmured near my ear. "You are not a guest. You are the landlord inspecting the property." I looked at him. Eli was wearing a gray suit that he had owned since law school. It was clean and pressed, but the cut was boxy, the fabric a little too shiny under the lobby lights. He did not look like a corporate raider. He looked like a high school history teacher who had gotten lost on his way to a faculty mixer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the only thing of value he was carrying. It was the drafting pen, my mother's pen. The brass was tarnished where her fingers had held it 1,000 times, sketching the engines that paid for this hotel rental. Eli slid the pen into his breast pocket. He adjusted it carefully, making sure the clip was visible. To 99% of the people in this room, it was just an old pen, but to the 1% who remembered the history of HelioCor, to the men like Malcolm Price who had been there when Lydia Lane was drawing the future on a napkin, it was a ghost. "Ready?" Eli asked. "Ready," I said. We walked into the ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and shimmering gowns. The noise was a dull roar of polite laughter and clinking glass. Waiters drifted through the crowd like sharks, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like pieces of modern art. We navigated through the tables, moving past the prime real estate near the stage where the tablecloths were silk and the centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids. We kept walking, past the investors, past the vice presidents, past the sales team who were already loosening their ties and getting loud. We arrived at table 39. It was exactly where I knew it would be. We were wedged into the back corner, right next to the swinging double doors of the service entrance. Every time a waiter kicked the door open, a blast of steam and the smell of roasting chicken hit us. The table was already half full. Marcus, the senior engineer, was nursing a scotch and looking miserable. Sarah from Human Resources was picking at a bread roll. David from Quality Assurance was staring at his phone, probably checking job listings. "Emery," Marcus said, looking up with a mixture of surprise and pity. "You actually came, and you brought a civilian." "Civilian?" Eli asked, pulling out my chair. I prefer the term collateral damage. I sat down. The view from table 39 was terrible. A decorative pillar blocked half the stage. The acoustics were muddy. We were the exiles. "Who is the suit?" David asked, gesturing to Eli with his fork. "This is Eli," I said. "He is my fiancé." "Nice to meet you," Eli said, shaking hands. "I hear great things about the quality assurance protocols here, or rather, the creative interpretation of them." David choked on his water. "Why are you guys here?" Sarah whispered, leaning across the table. "Sloan is going to announce the lifestyle brand tonight. It is going to be a bloodbath for the engineering budget. I did not think you would want to watch." I picked up the linen napkin and unfolded it across my lap. I looked at the faces of my coworkers. These were the people who did the work. These were the people who stayed late. These were the people Graham and Sloan treated as overhead costs to be minimized. "We are not here to watch." "Sarah," I said quietly. I picked up my water glass and looked at Eli. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "We are here to file a complaint," I said. "We eat the salad, then we eat the board." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight swept across the room. cutting through the darkness and landing on the grand staircase at the side of the hall. The music swelled. It was a remix of a pop song, loud and bass-heavy. Sloane Kincaid appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was made of liquid silver. It clung to her body and trailed behind her like a comet's tail. She was flanked by 4 people, 2 men in skinny suits who I recognized as TikTok influencers, and 2 junior executives who looked like they were hyperventilating from the proximity to greatness. Sloane paused at the top of the stairs, waiting for the applause. It came, obedient and polite from the front tables, raucous and desperate from the sales team. She smiled, a practiced, camera-ready expression that did not reach her eyes, and began her descent. She worked the room like a politician. She stopped at the gold tables, laughing, touching shoulders, accepting compliments. She was the sun, and the entire room was orbiting around her gravity. As she moved toward the stage, her path took her past the outer rim of the galaxy. She walked past the silver tables, and then she made a detour. She was heading straight for table 39. "Oh God," Sarah hissed. "Don't make eye contact." Sloane stopped right in front of our table. Up close, she was flawless. Her makeup was precise, her hair sculpted. She smelled of expensive vanilla and ambition. The room quieted down. People turned to watch. Sloane Kincaid acknowledging the cheap seats was a spectacle. Her eyes flicked over Marcus, dismissed him. They flicked over Sarah, dismissed her. Then they landed on me. "Emery," she exclaimed, her voice pitched loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. "I am so glad you could make it. I know it is a bit of a trek from wherever you are living now." She turned her gaze to Eli. She looked him up and down, taking in the gray suit, the scuffed shoes, the lack of a designer watch. A slow, cruel smirk spread across her face. "And this must be the fiancé," she said. "Wow." She let the silence hang for a second. "You brought him in that car?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward the valet stand outside. "I saw it from the window. And that suit? It is very vintage. Real budget date vibes tonight." "Huh." Laughter rippled from the tables nearby. The sales guys at table 20 were chuckling loudly, eager to show they were in on the joke. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I did not look down. I looked straight at her. Sloane leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a stage whisper that was meant to be heard by everyone within a 30-foot radius. "Don't worry, Emery," she said. "Daddy's company will always have a spot for frugal people. We need someone to count the paper clips, right?" She straightened up, beaming at her entourage, waiting for the laugh. Eli cleared his throat. It was a quiet sound, but in the hush of the mockery, it was distinct. He looked up at Sloane. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He looked mildly amused, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting mold culture. "Budgets are just constraints, Ms. Kincaid," Eli said. His voice was calm, steady, and carried a weight that cut through the perfume and the music. Sloane blinked. She was not used to the furniture talking back. "Excuse me, constraints," Eli repeated. He picked up his water glass and took a sip. "Constraints make structures stable. Without them, things tend to collapse under their own weight. Constraints are what keep the rocket from blowing up." He set the glass down. "Until they don't." Sloane frowned. She didn't understand the threat. She only heard the tone, which wasn't submissive enough. But she had a schedule to keep. She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Cute," she said. "Enjoy the chicken. It is the most expensive meal you will eat all year." She spun around, her silver dress whipping the air, and marched toward the stage. The spotlight followed her. The room turned back to the main attraction. At table 39, nobody spoke. Marcus was staring at Eli with his mouth slightly open. Eli calmly reached into his breast pocket and tapped the clip of the brass pen. He looked at me, and his eyes were dancing. "She has no idea," he whispered. "That was the most fun I have had in a decade." I watched Sloane ascend the stage, basking in the applause. She called us frugal. I said, "Frugality is a virtue," Eli replied, unfolding his napkin completely. It means we know the value of things. And tonight, I think the price of this company is about to drop significantly. The salad course arrived with the kind of pomp and circumstance usually reserved for a coronation. Waiters synchronized their movements, dropping plates of arugula and shaved fennel in front of 500 guests simultaneously. At table 39, the arrival of the greens was met with a collective sigh of relief. It meant we had survived the appetizers without being asked to leave. I picked up my fork, but my appetite had vanished the moment Sloane Kincaid made her joke about the budget date. My eyes were not on the salad. They were fixed on the head table, located on the riser at the far end of the ballroom. Specifically, I was watching Malcolm Price. Malcolm Price was the chairman of the board. He was a man carved out of granite and old money. He had silver hair that was always perfectly coiffed, and he wore his tuxedo with the ease of someone who had been born in one. Unlike Graham, who treated Heliocor as a personal piggy bank, Malcolm treated the company with a terrifying reverence. He was the historian. He was the keeper of the flame. He was the only person in the room who had been there when the first prototype engine was bolted to a test stand in a garage in 1982. He was also the only person in the room I was truly afraid of. Graham was an idiot. Sloane was a narcissist. You can outsmart idiots and narcissists. But Malcolm was sharp. He had an iron memory for details, specifically artifacts from the company's founding era. He collected them. I knew for a fact that his office was filled with framed blueprints and early circuit boards. And right now, Malcolm Price was not eating his salad. He was staring across the room. His gaze cut through the low light, bypassing the investors, bypassing the vice presidents, and landing with laser precision on our table. I froze. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Had he recognized me, I had worked here for 7 years, but I was always in the background, handing out agendas or fixing the projector. To him, I was just staff. Then I realized he was not looking at me. He was looking at the tablecloth in front of Eli. Eli had placed the brass drafting pen on the white linen, right next to his water glass. The downlighting from the ceiling caught the metal, making it gleam. It was a beacon. "Eli," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. "He is looking." Eli did not look up. He was busy inspecting a piece of endive on his fork with the scrutiny of a forensic pathologist. "I know," Eli said softly. "The vinaigrette is tragic. By the way, too much acid." "Eli, put the pen away," I hissed. "Malcolm Price is staring at it like he wants to eat it. That is the point." "Emery," Eli replied. He casually reached out and touched the pen. He did not pick it up. He simply rolled it. The heavy brass cylinder turned 180 degrees. The engraving, which had been facing the table, rolled upward. L. Lane. From this distance, surely he could not read it. It was impossible. But Malcolm Price knew the shape of that pen. He knew the specific heft of the brass. It was custom-made. There were only 3 of them ever in existence. One was in a museum, one was lost, and one was currently sitting next to a glass of tap water at the worst table in the room, at the head table. Malcolm went still. He slowly lowered his fork. He said something to the person next to him, but he did not break his visual lock on the object. Then, he stood up. Graham Kincaid had just approached the microphone at the podium to begin his opening remarks. Graham loved the sound of his own voice. "Welcome, family," Graham boomed, throwing his arms wide. "Tonight is about vision. Tonight is about looking forward." Malcolm Price ignored him completely. The chairman stepped down from the riser. He did not walk toward the podium. He did not head for the restrooms. He walked in a straight line, cutting through the center of the room. He walked past the gold tables. He walked past the silver tables. The room began to notice. Heads turned. Why was the chairman walking away while the CEO was speaking? The chatter at the nearby tables died down. A ripple of silence followed Malcolm like a wake behind a ship. "He is coming here," Sarah whispered, clutching her napkin. "Oh God, what did we do? Did we violate the dress code?" "Keep eating," Eli commanded gently. "Act like you belong." I forced my hand to lift the fork to my mouth. I tasted nothing. I felt like a spy who had just been made in enemy territory. Malcolm Price stopped at table 39. He loomed over us, up close. He smelled of sandalwood and aged scotch. His eyes were pale blue and incredibly intense. He did not look at me. He did not look at the terrified HR manager or the frozen engineers. He looked at the pen. "May I?" he asked. His voice was not angry. It was shaking. Eli looked up, feigning surprise. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and smiled. "The pen?" Sir Eli asked. "Of course." Eli picked it up, but he did not hand it over immediately. He held it in the light, turning it slowly. "It is a beautiful piece," Eli said conversationally. "Solid brass core, weighted for drafting torque. They do not make them like this anymore." Malcolm's hand was trembling slightly as he reached out. Eli placed the pen in his palm. The chairman held it as if it were a religious artifact. He ran his thumb over the engraving. L. Lane. He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, the professionalism was cracking around the edges. "Where did you get this?" Malcolm asked. His voice was a rasp. There was only one of these left. It was a gift. Lydia. She gave it to the board in 1985. It was supposed to be in the archive. Then it went missing the day she left. The music from the stage seemed to fade away. Graham was still talking in the background about paradigm shifts, but nobody at our table heard him. I did not get it from an archive. Eli said. Eli gestured toward me with an open hand. "It is not mine, sir," Eli said. "It belongs to her. It is a family heirloom." Malcolm Price turned his head. For the first time in 7 years, he actually looked at me. He did not see the operations director. He did not see the woman who refilled the coffee in the conference room. He looked at the structure of my face. He looked at the line of my jaw. He looked at my eyes. I did not look away. I stiffened, my spine straightening against the back of the cheap banquet chair. It was a reflex I had learned from my mother. When you are cornered, you do not shrink. You become stone. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened. He took a half step back. He looked from the pen to me, and then back to the pen. "Patterson," he whispered. The name sounded foreign in his mouth. "Your employee file says Patterson. It is a very common name." I said. My voice was steady, though my hands were shaking in my lap. "It is my father's name." Malcolm stared at me. He was doing the math. He was calculating the years. He was remembering a face that had been erased from the company photos, but evidently not from his conscience. "Lydia," he breathed. He looked around the room. He saw Sloane preening at the front table. He saw Graham shouting into the microphone. He saw the lavish excess that had been built on top of a foundation he helped bury. He leaned in close to me. He placed his hands on the table, leaning his weight on them, to the rest of the room. It might have looked like a casual greeting, but his knuckles were white. "They told me she sold," Malcolm muttered, the words tumbling out fast and low. "Graham told me she took a cash deal. He said she wanted out. He said she was unstable. He looked into my eyes, searching for the truth. I never believed him." Malcolm said, "The paperwork was too clean. The exit was too fast. Lydia Lane would never have walked away from her engines for money. She loved this work more than she loved people." He looked at the pen in his hand. Then he placed it gently back on the table in front of Eli. "If you have this pen," Malcolm said, "then you have the rest of it. Don't you? You have the portfolio." I said nothing. I just held his gaze. Malcolm straightened up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Eli, then at me. "The salad is terrible," Malcolm said loudly, his voice returning to its chairman projection, "and the acoustics in this corner are unacceptable." He looked at Graham, who was now showing a video of a rocket launch that I knew for a fact had failed 3 seconds after the clip cut off. "Ms. Patterson," Malcolm said, "and Mr. Ward," Eli supplied. "Elias Ward, Ms. Patterson, Mr. Ward," Malcolm said. "I find myself in need of a quiet place to discuss historical preservation. I would appreciate it if you would join me in the Founder's Suite." Immediately, the table went silent. Sarah's fork clattered onto her plate. Marcus looked like he was having a stroke. The founder's suite was a private viewing room on the mezzanine level. It was soundproof. It was secure. It was where the real decisions were made. "We haven't finished our dinner," Eli said, glancing at his plate. "I will have them send up steaks," Malcolm said. "Real ones, not this rubber chicken." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, heading toward the side exit that led to the private elevators. He did not look back at the CEO. He did not look back at the investors. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my head was clear. Eli stood up beside me. He picked up the pen and slid it back into his pocket. "Well," Eli said to the stunned group at table 39, "enjoy the show, everyone. I think we have been upgraded." I took Eli's arm. We walked past the kitchen doors, following the silver-haired man who had just realized that the ghost of the company's past had come back to audit the books. As we reached the shadows of the exit hallway, I looked back one last time. Sloane was laughing at something on her phone. Graham was basking in the spotlight. They had no idea that the man who signed their checks had just walked out of the room with the woman who owned their future. The heavy oak doors of the founder's suite closed behind us, sealing out the noise of the gala. The sudden silence was jarring. 1 second, the air was vibrating with bass-heavy pop music and the clatter of 500 forks hitting china. The next, it was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the climate control system and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. This room was the Holy of Holies. It was where the board met to decide the fate of thousands of employees. The walls were lined with dark mahogany and velvet, hung with oil portraits of the company's history. There was Graham Kincaid, looking noble and visionary in a painting commissioned 5 years ago. There were the early investors. There were the patent attorneys who had secured the initial rights. But my eyes went instantly to the space between the windows on the north wall. There was a rectangle of discoloration on the wallpaper. It was a faint, slightly darker patch where the sun had not hit the fabric for decades. To a casual observer, it just looked like an empty spot where a painting had been removed for cleaning. I walked over to it. I reached out and touched the faded velvet. "That is where she hung," I said softly. "Lydia Lane, 1982. She was wearing a lab coat, not a gown. She had grease on her hands in the portrait." Malcolm Price was pouring himself a drink at the sidebar. His hand shook, the crystal decanter rattling against the glass tumbler. He took a long swallow of amber liquid before turning to face me. "Graham ordered it taken down the day the acquisition was finalized," Malcolm said. His voice was tired, stripped of the commanding baritone he used in the ballroom. "He told us it was for the best. He said Lydia had broken. He said the pressure of the launch schedules had cracked her mind. He told the board she was demanding to be bought out, that she wanted to take the cash and vanish to Europe to recover." Malcolm looked at the empty rectangle, then at me. "I asked to see the exit interview," he confessed. "I asked to speak with her. Graham told me she refused. He said she was volatile. He said she was a liability to the stock price, and that if we let her speak, she would crash the IPO. So we let him handle it. We let him erase her because we wanted to be rich more than we wanted to be right." He sat down heavily in one of the leather wingback chairs. "I never fully believed it. Lydia was the most stubborn human being I ever met. The idea of her taking a check to quit? It never sat right, but the dividends were good, and the years went by, and eventually, the lie became the truth." Eli walked over to the large conference table in the center of the room. He placed his battered leather briefcase on the polished wood. It looked absurdly out of place next to the crystal ashtrays and fresh floral arrangements. "She did not sell. Mr. Price?" Eli said. The playful budget date persona was gone completely. This was Elias Ward, the litigator. And she did not break. She was outmaneuvered by a board that valued marketing over engineering. So she did the only thing she could. She bet on the long game. Eli clicked the latches of the briefcase open. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were not yellowed originals this time. They were crisp, white, and stamped with the official seal of the Secretary of State. Lydia Lane transferred her entire equity stake into a vehicle called the Lane Continuity Instrument, Eli explained, sliding the papers across the table toward Malcolm. It is a hybrid trust structure, extremely aggressive, extremely specific. It locks 48% of the voting stock into a dormant shell foundation. Malcolm picked up the documents. He put on his reading glasses. I have never heard of this entity. You were not supposed to, Eli said. The existence of the instrument was buried in the side letters of the 1989 restructuring. Graham signed it because he thought the trigger conditions were impossible to meet. He thought he was burying her shares forever. Trigger conditions? Malcolm asked, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. The instrument has a reversion clause, Eli said. The dormant shares wake up and revert to the direct control of the living heir if the company fails to meet specific operational covenants, specifically, if the safety rating drops below a AAA standard, or if the research and development investment falls below 20% of gross revenue for 3 consecutive quarters. Eli pulled another file from his bag. This one was thick with spreadsheets and scanned invoices. I have spent the last 3 nights auditing your internal accounts. Eli continued. HelioCore has not hit a 20% research spend in 7 years. The current allocation is 6%. The rest is being diverted. Malcolm looked up. Diverted to where, brand activations, I said. I stepped away from the wall and joined them at the table. That is what Sloan calls them. Executive experiences, influencer partnerships. The money that was supposed to fix the propulsion systems is currently paying for the champagne downstairs and the lease on Sloan's penthouse in New York. We are bleeding the engineering dry to paint the hull gold. Eli tapped the document in Malcolm's hand. This morning at 9 o'clock, I filed a reversion claim and a beneficial ownership update with the State Commerce Division, Eli said calmly. It was stamped and processed 30 minutes before the markets closed on Friday. It is not a proposal. It is an accomplished fact. The trust is dissolved. The shell company is liquidated. Malcolm turned the page to the final exhibit. He stared at it for a long time. It was the certificate of ownership, listing the new controlling shareholder of HelioCore Systems, Emery Patterson Lane. You own 48% of the company, Malcolm whispered. He looked up at the ceiling, doing the mental arithmetic that ruled his life. Graham holds 28%, Malcolm said, thinking aloud. I hold 2%. The rest is scattered among public float and institutional funds that vote with the wind. If you have 48%, I only need 2% more to have absolute, unchallengeable control. I finished for him. I need you, Malcolm. The silence stretched out. Malcolm looked at the portrait of Graham Kincaid on the wall. He looked at the empty spot where my mother used to be. He looked at the documents that proved he had been presiding over a hollowed-out shell of a company. Graham will fight this, Malcolm said. He will sue. He will claim the instrument is invalid. He will claim you hacked the records. He can try, Eli said. But while he is suing, Emery controls the board. She controls the bank accounts. She controls the building security. Graham Kincaid is effectively a trespasser the moment we walk back out those doors. Malcolm looked at me. His expression was a complex map of regret and calculation. He was a survivor. He had survived the purge of 1989, and he intended to survive the purge of tonight. What is your intention? Emery, he asked. Do you want to liquidate, strip the assets, and burn it down to spite him? If that is the plan, I cannot help you. I have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. I am the majority shareholder, I reminded him. And no, I do not want to burn it down. I want to build it back. I leaned over the table, placing my hands on the cool mahogany. I want to fire the people who think safety is a suggestion, I said. I want to refund the marketing budget back into the labs. I want to put the engineers back in charge. I want to stop making tech accessories and start making engines that actually work. And I want to put her picture back on the wall. I pointed to the empty rectangle. I am not here to kill HelioCore, Malcolm, I said. I am here to save it from the parasites who have been feeding on it for 30 years. But to do that, I need to cut the head off the snake. Tonight. Malcolm closed the folder. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He took another sip of his scotch. He was weighing his loyalty to a friend who had lied to him against the reality of a legal document that gave him no choice. He was weighing the past against the future. He stood up. Graham has been sloppy, Malcolm said quietly. He has been arrogant, and he has treated this board like a rubber stamp for too long. He looked at Eli. Is the filing watertight? Titanium, Eli assured him. I wrote the reversion claim myself. Malcolm nodded. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket. He adjusted his cufflinks. The transformation was instant. The tired old man vanished, and the chairman of the board returned. If I back you, Malcolm said, looking me dead in the eye. There is no going back. We go out there, and we decapitate the leadership in front of the press, the investors, and the industry. It will be brutal. It will be public. Graham will scream. Sloan will make a scene. He paused. Are you prepared to finish this in front of everyone? Ms. Patterson. I thought about the 7 years I had spent in the shadows. I thought about the coffee runs. I thought about the late nights fixing spreadsheets while Sloan posted selfies. I thought about the way Graham looked through me like I was made of glass. I thought about the rusty car and the cheap dress, and the way they laughed at Eli. I looked at Malcolm Price and smiled. It was not a nice smile. Mr. Price? I said. They made me rehearse for 7 years. I am not just prepared, I am overdue. Malcolm nodded. He walked to the door and held it open for us. Then let's go, he said. I believe the CEO is about to finish his speech. It would be a shame if nobody was there to give the rebuttal. We did not go back to table 39. When the heavy doors of the founder's suite clicked shut behind us, leaving the silence of the deposition room behind, the wall of sound from the ballroom hit us like a physical wave. It was a chaotic mix of clinking silverware, low-level chatter, and the thumping bass of the background music. Usually, this was the moment I would have kept my head down. I would have scurried along the wall, dodging the waiters, apologizing for my existence until I reached the safety of the dark corner near the kitchen. But I was not that person anymore. The woman who apologized for taking up space had been left upstairs in the suite, along with the ghost of the old heliocore. Eli took my hand. We walked straight to the edge of the velvet rope that separated the general seating from the VIP dance floor. We stood there, right on the perimeter of the gold zone, flanked by a massive floral arrangement of white lilies that smelled suffocatingly sweet. Malcolm Price had separated from us in the hallway. He walked back to his seat at the center of the head table with the terrifying neutrality of a professional poker player. He sat down. He placed his napkin on his lap. He did not look at his phone. He did not look at Graham. He simply stared straight ahead, waiting for the building to collapse. Ready, Eli whispered. He was holding his phone in his hand. The screen dimmed low so the light would not draw attention. His thumb was hovering over a button in his secure mail client. Do it, I said. Eli tapped the screen once. It was such a small motion. It was the same motion people use to order a pizza or like a photo of a cat. But in that split second, a high-priority, encrypted packet of data was fired from a server in Delaware, bounced through a secure relay, and landed simultaneously in the inboxes of 12 specific people sitting 10 feet away from us. On stage, Graham Kincaid was in love with his own voice. He was gripping the podium, his face flushed with the heat of the spotlights and the 3 glasses of scotch he had consumed during the appetizers. Behind him, a massive LED screen was playing a sizzle reel that Sloan had directed. It was a montage of people in expensive athleisure wear looking at the sky, intercut with quick flashes of rockets that were actually stock footage from NASA, not heliocore. We are not just an engineering firm, Graham boomed into the microphone. We are a movement. We are a lifestyle. When you think of the stars, I don't want you to think about propulsion ratios. I want you to think about synergy. I want you to think about the heliocore spirit. He paused for applause. The front tables clapped dutifully. The back tables were too busy trying to get the waiters to refill their wine glasses. And that is why, Graham continued, his voice rising to a crescendo. I am thrilled to announce that next quarter, we are launching the Kincaid Orbital Collection, a line of high-performance apparel for the visionary in all of us, at the head table. The first phone buzzed. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration against the hard wood of the table, then another, then three more. It sounded like a swarm of angry hornets had suddenly materialized under the tablecloth. The chief financial officer, a man named Sterling who had the constitution of a nervous rabbit, was the first to look down. He frowned. He tapped his screen. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It started at his chin and vanished into his hairline, leaving him looking like a wax statue. Next to him, the general counsel picked up his phone. He was a shark of a lawyer, a man who usually enjoyed a fight. He read the subject line. He stopped chewing. He read the first paragraph. He put his fork down slowly, as if the cutlery had suddenly become too heavy to lift. Urgent beneficial ownership, update and asset preservation order, lane continuity instrument, the whispers began. They started low, just a rustle of confusion among the board members. But in the acoustic bowl of the stage area, they carried, "Who sent this?" the CFO hissed to the general counsel, forgetting to cover his mouth. "It is a state filing," the lawyer whispered back, his eyes darting around the room. "It is stamped. Look at the timestamp," Lane, another director, muttered, squinting at her screen. "Is that Lydia's foundation? I thought that was dead." "Who is Emery Patterson?" That question floated out from the end of the table. It was asked by one of the independent directors, a woman from a venture capital firm who had no idea who actually ran the logistics of the company she sat on the board of. "Patterson," the CFO whispered, "the operations girl, the one who does the budgets. Did we violate the covenant?" Someone else asked. "Read the attachment. It says we are in default on the RD clause." Graham was still talking. He was oblivious. He was deep into a story about how he had the idea for the clothing line while meditating on a mountain, which was a lie because Graham could not sit still for 30 seconds, let alone meditate. "I looked up at the stars," Graham said, spreading his hands theatrically, "and I realized that the future isn't about machines, it is about the people who dream of them." Sloane was sitting to his right. She was the first one to notice that the audience at the head table had stopped looking at her father. She saw the phones. She saw the pale faces. She saw the general counsel frantically texting his paralegal. She frowned. This was ruining her shot. The live stream camera was focused on the stage, but the energy in the room was shifting. She leaned forward and tapped her glass with a spoon, trying to draw attention back to the speech. When that didn't work, she hissed loudly at her father. "Daddy," she said, her voice cutting through the microphone's pickup pattern. "Daddy, tell the yacht story. The one about the Monaco harbor. They are losing focus." Graham blinked. He looked down at her, irritated at the interruption. "Not now." "Sloane," he snapped, his voice booming over the speakers. "I am building to the climax." "Graham," the general counsel said. He didn't whisper this time. He spoke with the terrified urgency of a man who realizes the brakes have been cut. "Graham, you need to look at your email. Now." Graham froze. He looked at his lawyer. He looked at the row of board members who were all staring at their phones like they were reading their own obituaries. "I am in the middle of a speech." "Bob," Graham said, laughing nervously. "It can wait. It cannot wait," the lawyer said. "It is a change of control notice." Graham's smile faltered. "A what?" That was the moment Malcolm Price stood up. He rose slowly, unfolding his height with a dignity that commanded the room. He picked up his microphone, which was resting on the table for the upcoming toast. He switched it on. A feedback squeal pierced the air, silencing the murmurs in the ballroom. 500 faces turned toward the head table. "Mr. Kincaid," Malcolm said. His voice was calm, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I believe the board has just received a notification regarding a change in the majority shareholder status of this company." The room went deathly silent. You could hear the ice melting in the buckets. Graham looked at Malcolm as if the chairman had just spoken in tongues. What are you doing? Malcolm Graham hissed, covering his mic with his hand. Sit down. You are ruining the flow. Have you read the notice? Graham Malcolm asked, his voice booming through the hall. It appears that the lane continuity instrument has been triggered due to sustained covenant breaches. Specifically, the misappropriation of research funds. Graham's face turned a violent shade of red. He grabbed his phone from the podium, swiped it open, and stared at the notification. This is a joke, Graham barked, laughing loudly into the mic. This is a prank. Someone hacked the server. Where is it? He pointed a shaking finger at the back of the room, near where we were standing. Though he didn't see us. It is a phishing scam, Graham shouted, his composure unraveling instantly. Do not open it. It is a virus. Sloane stood up, grabbing her own mic. Guys, seriously, she said, forcing a bright, hysterical laugh. This is so embarrassing. Our competitors are obviously jealous of the rebrand. We have great security. We will fix this in a second. It is not a hack. Graham, Malcolm said. He turned to the general counsel. Bob, verify the filing. Is it a valid state document? The general counsel looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He stood up slowly, holding his phone with both hands. Bob, Graham yelled, Tell them it is a fake. The lawyer looked at Graham. Then he looked at Malcolm. He was a man who knew how to read the wind, and he knew a hurricane when he saw one. It is real, the general counsel said. His voice shook, but the microphone caught every syllable. It is a certified filing from the Secretary of State. It was time-stamped at 4:55 p.m. today. Impossible. Graham shouted. Lydia is gone. Her shares are dead. The trust was not dead. Sir, the lawyer corrected. Reading from the screen, it was dormant, and it has reverted to the beneficial heir. Graham gripped the sides of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Who, he demanded. Who is doing this? Which fund? I will sue them into the ground. Malcolm turned slowly. He looked past the lights. He looked past the investors. He looked past the confusion and the fear. He looked directly at where Eli and I were standing by the lilies. It is not a fund. Graham, Malcolm said softly into the mic. It is the person who has been cleaning up your mess. Graham followed Malcolm's gaze. Sloane followed it. The general counsel followed it. Like a tide turning. 500 heads swiveled in our direction. The spotlight operator, sensing the drama, swung the beam away from the stage. It swept across the room, blinding us for a second before settling. I stood there in my clearance rack dress. Eli stood next to me in his shiny gray suit. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the spotlight cooling fan. Graham squinted against the glare. He looked at me. He blinked. He looked again. Patterson, he asked. His voice was small, confused, and magnified by 10,000 watts of audio power. The operations girl, Sloane, burst out laughing. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Emery, she shrieked. You think Emery is doing this? She barely makes rent. She drives a Honda. She owns 48% of the voting stock. Sloane, the general counsel said, reading the bottom line of the email, and as of 5 o'clock today, she is the controlling entity of HelioCore Systems. The silence broke. The room exploded into noise. It wasn't applause. It was the sound of an empire cracking down the middle. I stepped forward, moving out of Eli's shadow and into the light. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just stood there and let them look at the drywall that was about to bring the house down. Who is the proxy? Graham roared into the microphone. His face was a mask of sweating, confused fury. He looked at me, standing there in the spotlight, and then his eyes darted past me, scanning the shadows of the ballroom for a lawyer, a banker, or a rival CEO. To him, it was impossible that the threat was standing in plain sight. I want a name, Graham shouted, slamming his hand on the podium. Which hedge fund is behind this? Who put you up to this? Patterson, did a competitor pay you? I will have you arrested for corporate espionage before you can leave this building. Malcolm Price was still standing. He looked tired. but his hand was steady as he pointed a single finger directly at me. "There is no fund." "Graham," Malcolm said, his voice cutting through the CEO's bluster. "There is no competitor. There is no proxy. You are looking at the majority shareholder. It is her." "It has always been her," Sloane Kincaid snapped. She grabbed the microphone from its stand and marched to the edge of the stage. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing the spoiled, terrified child underneath. Her Sloane screeched, pointing a manicured nail at me. "Are you people insane? She is just operations. She is a nobody. She orders the gluten-free muffins for the Tuesday meetings. She begs me for budget approvals to buy printer toner. She is not a shareholder. She is the help." Sloane looked out at the audience, desperate for validation. "You all know her," Sloane yelled, gesturing wildly. "She is the one who sends those annoying emails about submitting your timesheets. She is the one who organizes the Secret Santa. You think she owns HelioCore? She probably put that dress on a credit card she can't pay off." The room was silent. Nobody laughed. The employees at table 39 were standing up, watching with wide eyes. I took a step forward, then another. I walked past the velvet rope. I walked past the floral arrangements. I walked up the stairs to the stage. Security did not stop me. The guards looked at Malcolm, who gave a slight nod, and they stepped back. I walked right up to Sloane, up close. I could see the panic in her eyes. I could see the way her makeup was starting to crease around her mouth. She was taller than me in her heels. But in that moment, she looked very small. I reached out and took the microphone from her hand. She was so shocked she let it go without a fight. I turned to face the room. The spotlight was hot on my face. "My name is not just Emery Patterson," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. "My mother was Lydia Lane." A gasp rippled through the room. It started with the older engineers at the back tables and washed forward to the board members at the front. "For 30 years, you have walked past the empty space on the wall in the founder's suite," I said. "You erased her name. You erased her legacy. You thought if you took her picture down, you could take her company. But Lydia Lane was an engineer. She built fail-safes into everything she touched, including her equity." Graham looked like he had been punched in the gut. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "Lydia is dead," Graham rasped. "She died in Zurich 10 years ago, and the day she died," I said, "the Lane continuity instrument activated. It has been waiting for you to make a mistake, and you made thousands of them." I gestured to Eli. Eli walked up the stairs. He looked bored. He looked like he was about to read a grocery list. He was holding a tablet in one hand and my mother's brass pen in the other. He took the other microphone from the podium, ignoring Graham completely. "We have compiled a rather extensive list of covenant violations," Eli said. His voice was dry, matter-of-fact, and devastatingly clear. "I will not bore you with the minor infractions, like the private jet usage or the expensed family vacations. Let us stick to the felonies." Eli tapped his tablet. "Item 1, Eli read, October 14, 2018. $4 million transferred from the structural integrity testing budget to a shell company named Kincaid Global Branding. This money was used to pay for a launch party in Ibiza. The structural testing was never completed." A murmur of anger went through the engineering tables. They remembered that year. They remembered being told there was no money for equipment. Item 2. Eli continued, scrolling down, January 2020, $2.5 million diverted from the Guidance Chip Procurement Fund. The money was used to purchase a controlling stake in a luxury handbag startup owned by Sloane Kincaid. The guidance chips were replaced with inferior units from a supplier that failed 2 safety audits. That is a lie. Sloane shouted, though she stepped back. Away from Eli, that was a strategic partnership. It was a brand synergy investment. It was theft, Eli corrected calmly. Item 3. The Neptune Initiative. On paper, this is a research project for deep space propulsion. In reality, according to the bank transfers, the Neptune Initiative is just a checking account that pays the mortgage on Graham Kincaid's third home in Aspen. Graham lunged for the microphone. Stop this. Turn it off. Cut the sound. He looked frantically at the sound booth. The audio technician, a young guy named Kevin, who I had helped get a raise 3 months ago, looked back at Graham. Then Kevin took his hands off the mixing board and folded his arms. The sound stayed on. "How did you get this?" Graham screamed, his voice cracking. "You hacked us. You broke into the mainframe. That is a federal crime. I will have you buried for this. You stole confidential data." I stepped in front of Eli. I looked Graham dead in the eye. I did not hack anything. "Graham," I said softly into the mic. The room leaned in. "You gave it to me," I said. Graham blinked. "What, for 7 years?" I said, "Every time you wanted to hide an expense, you sent the file to me. You told me to fix it. You told me to move the numbers around so the board wouldn't notice. You told me to relabel the yacht rental as client acquisition costs. You told me to code Sloane's wardrobe budget as prototype materials." I pulled a small flash drive from the pocket of my cheap dress. I held it up. "I did exactly what you told me to do." I said, "I cleaned it up. I made the spreadsheets balance. I made the reports look pretty. But I am an operations director. Graham, I keep records. I kept a copy of every single original invoice. I kept every email where you ordered me to commit fraud. I kept every text message where Sloane asked me to hide her shopping sprees." I turned to the general counsel, who was sitting at the head table, looking like he wanted to vanish. "Bob," I said, "is the reversion clause valid?" The general counsel stood up slowly. His hands were shaking. He looked at Graham. Then he looked at the terrified board members. And finally, he looked at the state filings on his phone. "The instrument is self-executing," Bob said, his voice weak but audible. "Upon the death of the grantor and the breach of the covenants, the shares transfer automatically. There is no vote required. It happened the moment the RD spend dropped below 20%. And how long has it been?" "Below 20%, I asked. 7 years, Bob whispered. "So I have owned this company for 7 years. I said, "I just decided to let you run it until you proved you didn't deserve it." I looked back at Graham. He was trembling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer, cold terror of a man who realizes he has built his life on a trapdoor. "You wanted me invisible," I said to him, my voice ringing out across the silent ballroom. "You put me in the back office. You put me at the table by the kitchen. You thought if you didn't look at me, I didn't exist." I took a step closer to him, but I was there. I said, "I was there right behind every number you asked me to hide. I was there every time you stole from my mother's legacy. You treated me like the drywall. Graham, you thought I was just there to hold up the paint." I let the silence hang for a heartbeat. "But the drywall is the only thing holding up the house," I said, "and I am done holding it up." I turned to the crowd. "This is not a hostile takeover," I announced. "This is a repossession." For a second, there was silence. Then, from the back of the room, from table 39, a single person started clapping. It was Marcus. Then Sarah joined in. Then the entire engineering department stood up. Then the sales team, realizing which way the wind was blowing, started cheering. It was a wave of noise that crashed over the stage. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of a crew watching the captain walk the plank. Graham stared at the cheering crowd, his mouth opening and closing. Sloane stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. They were not looking at a family dispute anymore. They were looking at a coup, and I had brought the receipts. The applause from the back of the room was still echoing off the crystal chandeliers. When Sloane Kincaid finally snapped, it was not a graceful break. It was the sound of a spoiled child realizing that for the first time in her life, the toys were not just being taken away. They were being given to the kid she bullied on the playground. She lunged for the microphone stand on the bandstand, ripping the cordless mic from its clip with a screech of feedback that made half the room cover their ears. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving in her liquid silver dress. She looked out at the sea of employees who were still standing, still clapping for the woman who approved their expense reports, and she decided to burn the bridge while standing on it. "Stop it!" Sloane shrieked. Her voice cracked. high and thin. "Stop clapping. You are clapping for the help. You are clapping for a nobody." She pointed a trembling finger at me. I was standing center stage, calm, holding my ground. "Do you honestly think this person can run a brand like HelioCore?" Sloan yelled, desperate to find an angle that would stick. "Look at her. Look at that dress. It is polyester. It is from a clearance rack. She does not know luxury. She does not know vision. She counts beans." She turned her venom on Eli, who was standing a few feet away, checking his watch with practiced indifference. And him, Sloan laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "She brings a man in a suit that smells like mothballs, driving a car that belongs in a junkyard, and tells you he is a lawyer. Please, my followers would not even let him park their cars. These people are budget. They are cheap. They are nothing." The room went deadly quiet. The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. It was the kind of thing you might think in private but never say into a live microphone. Sloan was not done. She saw the brass pen in Eli's hand, the pen Malcolm had treated like a relic, and that pen Sloan sneered. Walking toward Eli, "You are basing a hostile takeover on a pen. It looks like Grandma's office supply. It is old. It is ugly. Just like this whole charade." She reached out to grab it. Eli moved his hand just an inch, smooth and fast. Sloan grasped at empty air. I stepped between them. I gently took the pen from Eli's hand. The brass was warm. It felt heavy, like holding a loaded gun. "It is old," I said, speaking into my microphone. My voice was low, but in the silence, it carried to the back wall. "It is older than you, Sloan, and it is worth more than everything you are wearing." I turned to Malcolm Price. The chairman was standing by the podium, watching the scene with the grim satisfaction of a man witnessing an execution he had ordered. "Malcolm," I said, "you knew the history. You knew the man who commissioned this pen. Would you please read the inscription on the barrel into the microphone, so everyone knows exactly whose office supplies these are?" I handed the pen to Malcolm. He put on his glasses. He held the pen under the podium light. He cleared his throat. "To Lydia Lane." Malcolm read. His voice shook with a sudden, deep emotion. "The mind that makes Helio fly." He paused. He looked up at the room. Signed, E.H. A gasp went through the older tables, the ones occupied by the engineers with gray hair and the project managers who had been around since the 80s. They knew those initials. E.H. A voice from the crowd whispered, "Ezra Helio, Ezra Helio," the man whose name was on the building before it was shortened to HelioCore, the man Graham Kincaid claimed to have bought out, the man who had disappeared into history alongside my mother. Sloan frowned. She looked confused. She did not know who Ezra Helio was. She probably thought the company was named after a Greek god. So what? Sloan snapped. "Someone signed a pen. Who cares?" I looked at Kevin in the sound booth. I raised my hand. "Eli," I said, "plug it in." Eli had already connected the flash drive to the presentation laptop on the podium. He hit the spacebar. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying Sloan's high-definition branding reel, flickered black. Then, static cut across the display. A video started playing. It was grainy. The colors were washed out, typical of home video footage from 1985. The timestamp in the corner read August 12th, 1985. The setting was a cluttered garage. There were blueprints taped to the walls. There were half-finished engine casings on workbenches. 2 people were in the frame. One was a young man with wild hair and thick glasses. It was Ezra Helio. The other was a woman. She was wearing oversized coveralls, her hair tied back in a messy bun, grease smudged across her cheek. She was holding a wrench in one hand and a sandwich in the other. She was laughing. It was Lydia Lane. "My mother?" The audio crackled, then cleared up. "Okay, are we recording the voice of a very young Graham Kincaid?" asked from behind the camera. "We are recording. Graham," Ezra said on screen, waving at the lens, documenting the moment of breakthrough. "Tell them." "Lydia." My mother looked at the camera. Her eyes were bright, alive with an intelligence that burned even through the low-resolution tape. "We cracked the thermal variance issue. she said. She picked up a complex-looking valve assembly. Graham wanted to just paint over the heat shielding to make it look better. But Ezra and I figured out that if we alloy the intake with titanium, it holds. It actually holds. It is going to change the industry, Ezra said, grinning at her. I am just the salesman. Folks, I just shake the hands. Lydia is the engine. She is the one who makes it fly. Without her, we are just selling expensive fireworks. The video cut to black. The ballroom was frozen. For 30 years, the narrative had been that Graham Kincaid was the genius, that Graham Kincaid designed the systems, that Graham Kincaid built this company from nothing. And there, in 30 seconds of grainy footage, the truth had just nuked his legacy. Graham was the cameraman. Graham was the guy who wanted to paint over the problem. Lydia was the engineer. I looked out at the faces of the employees. I saw realization dawning on them. The engineers at table 39 were staring at the blank screen with reverence. They realized that the propulsion tech they worked on every day, the patents that paid their mortgages, the very foundation of their careers, it all came from the woman whose daughter they had been ignoring in the hallway for 7 years. I turned to Graham. He was slumped against the wall, looking like a deflated balloon. He knew that video existed. He had probably spent decades trying to destroy every copy. Sloane, however, was not giving up. She was vibrating with denial. That is out of context, she shouted, grabbing the mic again. That is just a home movie. It proves nothing. My father saved this company. Lydia Lane was crazy. Everyone knows she was unstable. She had a breakdown and Dad had to step in and fix everything. She looked around the room, begging for someone to believe her. She abandoned you, Sloane yelled at the employees. She took a payout and left. My father stayed. He built the brand. He built the legacy. It was the same lie Malcolm had been told. It was the same lie the board had swallowed. It was the lie that had kept them in power. I walked up to Sloane. I was close enough to smell the panic sweat mixing with her expensive perfume. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth does not need to shout. You are right about one thing. Sloane, I said, your father did build something. He built a facade. I pointed to the screen where my mother's face had been. He took her work. He took her patents. I have the original assignment documents in this portfolio. Every major system HelioCore sells today is based on a design Lydia Lane filed before you were born. Sloane opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. You called me a nobody, I said softly. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my car. You mocked my life. You stand there in a $10,000 dress paid for by the money your father stole from the safety budget, and you talk about legacy. I leaned in. You built your identity on a myth. I said, I built mine fixing the mess your myth made. Sloane stared at me. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. She looked at the crowd. Nobody was looking at her. They were looking at me. She looked at her father. Graham Kincaid had his head in his hands. For the first time in her life, Sloane Kincaid was truly, completely invisible. The spotlight was still on her, but she had ceased to matter. I turned my back on her. I walked over to Malcolm Price. Mr. Chairman, I said, I believe we have a vote to conduct. The silence that followed my statement to Malcolm Price was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the sudden, terrified recalculation of net worths and career trajectories occurring in the minds of every board member at the head table. Malcolm Price adjusted his jacket. He stepped back up to the podium, effectively shielding me from Graham Kincaid, who looked like he was vibrating with the urge to physically strangle someone. Malcolm tapped the microphone once. The sound was authoritative. It was the sound of a gavel hitting a block. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm said, his voice stripped of all gala pleasantries. The board acknowledges the receipt of the state-certified filings regarding the Lane Continuity Instrument. We also acknowledge the credible, documented evidence of covenant breaches presented here tonight. He looked down the long table at his fellow directors. Under the bylaws of HelioCore Systems, Malcolm continued, a change in controlling interest necessitates an immediate review of executive leadership. We do not have the luxury of waiting for Monday morning. The markets open in 48 hours, and we need to have a statement ready. He turned to me. Ms. Patterson, Malcolm said formally. As the majority shareholder, the floor is yours. I looked at Eli. He was standing by the stairs, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed. He gave me a single, sharp nod. It was time to finish it. I leaned into the microphone. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Graham Kincaid as Chief Executive Officer, I said. My voice echoed through the ballroom. And I move for the immediate removal of Sloan Kincaid from all executive roles. Effective this second, Graham lunged forward, knocking over a water glass. You cannot do this, he screamed. I built this board. I own you people. Seconded, Malcolm said instantly. We have a motion and a second, the general counsel said. He had found his spine somewhere between the appetizer and the main course, mostly because he realized who was going to be signing his checks next week. We will proceed to a vote. Director Sterling. Sterling, the chief financial officer who had been sweating through his tuxedo since the first email hit, looked at Graham. Graham's eyes were bulging, silently promising murder. Then Sterling looked at the stack of evidence on the podium, the evidence that implicated him in signing off on the diverted funds. Sterling looked at me. He saw the only lifeboat in the ocean. Sterling said, his voice trembling. I vote yes. For the record, I was acting under duress regarding the previous budget approvals. Traitor, Graham shouted. I will ruin you. Director Vance, the lawyer asked. Moving down the line, Vance was the venture capitalist who had asked who I was 10 minutes ago. She looked bored. She was cutting her losses. She said. The optics here are a disaster. We need a clean slate. Director Liu. One by one, the dominoes fell. Some voted with fear, terrified of the forensic audit I had promised. Some voted with thinly veiled satisfaction, happy to finally be rid of a CEO who spent more time on his yacht than in the boardroom. The motion carries unanimously, the general counsel announced. He turned to Graham. Mr. Kincaid, the lawyer said, and for the first time in 20 years, he did not add, Sir. You are hereby relieved of your duties. You have no signature authority. You have no access to company accounts. Your keycard is deactivated. He turned to Sloan. Ms. Kincaid, your consultancy contract is terminated for cause. You are no longer an authorized representative of the brand. Graham stood there, swaying slightly. The air seemed to have gone out of him. He looked like a man who had woken up in a house that had no walls. This is illegal, Graham muttered. I will sue. I will tie this up in court for 10 years. I will burn this company to the ground. I will take everyone down with me. Sloan was sobbing now. It was a messy, ugly sound. She was clutching her phone, but she wasn't recording. You can't fire me, she wailed. I am the face of the company. If you do this, the internet will cancel HelioCore. My followers will destroy you. We are trending right now. Do you know what this will do to the brand equity? I looked at her. I felt a strange sense of pity. She really believed that. She really believed that likes and shares were a currency that could buy her way out of fraud. Sloan, I said. She stopped crying long enough to look at me with hateful, wet eyes. The internet loves a villain, I said calmly. But do you know what they love even more, a redemption story? They love a story about stolen credit being returned to the rightful owner by tomorrow morning. The narrative won't be about you. It will be about the daughter who came back for her mother's legacy. I looked at Eli again. He checked his watch. Right on time, Eli murmured. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 2 men walked in. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing cheap, ill-fitting suits that looked even worse than Eli's. They carried thick manila envelopes. They were process servers. They marched down the center aisle, their footsteps heavy on the carpet. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They walked straight up to the head table. Graham Kincaid, the first man asked. Graham stared at him. Get away from me. You are served, the man said, slapping a thick packet of papers onto Graham's chest. Graham instinctively grabbed them. Asset freeze order, restraining order regarding company property, and a notice of pending forensic audit by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The second man walked up to Sloane. Sloane Kincaid. No, she whispered, backing away. No, I am just a consultant. You are served, the man said, dropping a similar packet at her feet because she refused to take it. Notification of investigation into wire fraud and embezzlement regarding the Kincaid Global Branding shell entities. Graham looked at the papers in his hand. Then he looked at me. The fight went out of his eyes. He realized this wasn't just a board vote. This was the end of his life as he knew it. Security! Malcolm Price barked. 4 large security guards materialized from the edges of the room. These were men Graham had hired, men he had tipped, but they worked for the company, and the company had a new owner. Please escort Mr. Kincaid and Ms. Kincaid from the premises, Malcolm ordered. Confiscate their company phones and laptops before they exit the building. One of the guards stepped forward. Mr. Kincaid, please come with us. Don't make a scene. I am the CEO, Graham shouted weakly, but he let them take his arm. Sloane screamed as a guard took her phone from her hand. That is my personal property. My drafts are on there. It was purchased with company funds, ma'am, the guard said impassively. We watched them go. It was a long walk from the stage to the exit. Flashes from smartphones went off like fireworks as they passed the tables. I saw the faces of the employees. There was fear. Yes, change is scary. But under the fear, there was relief. There was vindictive glee. There was the satisfaction of watching the people who had made their lives miserable finally face consequences. When the doors closed behind them, the room felt instantly lighter. The air pressure changed. Malcolm Price turned back to the table. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair Graham had sat in for 30 years. Malcolm pulled it out. He looked at me. There was no hesitation in his eyes anymore. He had picked a side, and he knew he had picked the winner. Ms. Patterson, Malcolm said, gesturing to the seat. Your seat. I walked over to the chair. I looked at the velvet upholstery. I looked at the crystal glass. I looked at the view of the ballroom from the head of the table. I sat down. The perspective shifted. For 7 years, I had looked at this room from the bottom up. I had looked at it from the back corner by the kitchen. Now, I was looking at it from the top down. I felt the room rearrange itself around me. The gravity of the company shifted, anchoring itself to where I sat. Eli walked over. He pulled up a chair next to me, Sloane's old chair, and sat down. He pulled the brass pen from his pocket and placed it on the table in front of me. Not bad for a budget date, Eli whispered. I picked up the microphone one last time. The room was waiting. They were waiting for a speech. They were waiting for promises. I looked at table 39. Marcus raised his glass to me. Sarah was smiling through tears. We have a lot of work to do on Monday, I said. We have to fix the safety protocols. We have to refund the labs. We have to put the engineers back in charge. I paused. But for tonight, I said, leaning closer to the mic, to everyone in this room who has ever been told they are just budget, to everyone who has been told they are invisible, to everyone who has been told they are just the help. I smiled. It was a real smile this time. Congratulations, I said. We own the place now. I set the microphone down. The sound of it hitting the table was the final period on the sentence. The ballroom erupted. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge and justice. It is always satisfying to see the underdog take back what is theirs, isn't it? I would love to know where you are listening from today. So please drop a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Emery's takeover. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need a little victory in their day. See you in the next story.